Wonderful. I also want to give a shout out to our MC for the day, Tumi Mokabo, fellow South African. So we got 3 South Africans in the house in the entire summit, representing very proudly, and thank you to the organizers. So to kick off, we're talking AI through the lens of equality, transparency, and diversity. And to start, of course, you're to the left of me. We want to ask the question, what does AI through the lens of equality look like? So it's very specific, right? What does AI through the lens of equality look like? Valerie.
I love that question because it makes me think of the author of science fiction, William Gibson, who said the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I hope that the future will be a future where everybody has equal opportunity to benefit from artificial intelligence and equal opportunity to also be represented in artificial intelligence, in the design of artificial intelligence and in the evolution of artificial intelligence. And for this to happen, well, we need to do the work today by including people, including underrepresented groups, so they can have contribution to their perspectives and they can have also the opportunity to really make the future equal.
Really make the future equal. Eva Marie, equal, equality, equity, tell us.
Absolutely. So one thing that I always make the difference is we have ethical AI and we have trusted AI. So it's a question of how do we do the right things and how do we do things right. And when it comes to the technical implementation, we often see what really becomes difficult. What is actually meant by the policymaker? And we have these words, equality, but then you want to build your model and you want to, what does it actually mean? How do I make sure that my model is actually supporting equality? And thinking about it, you then realize it's not often equality that we need, it's actually equity. And equity means a different solution for everyone. It doesn't mean the same solution for everyone. It doesn't mean that everybody gets the same size of shoes.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful picture that demonstrates the difference between equality and equity. And that's basically 3 little boys trying to watch a football match and there's a big wall. And the tall one can easily look over the wall. The second and the third one can't really see. And equality means every single one of them gets the same box. Yeah. That means the tall one, the wall goes up to here, the middle one can see perfectly, and the small one still looks at the wall. And that is the difference on saying, let's actually make sure our AI solution bring people together, enable everybody. And it doesn't mean that everybody gets the same answer. It doesn't mean that everyone gets the same recommendation. It actually means people get suited to their needs.
But they have an opportunity to get an answer, is what you're saying. So
yes.
Equality versus equity. What does AI through the lens of equality look like? Francesca.
Yes, so I'd like to follow up because I agree with what both Eve-Marie and Valerie have said. So equality should not mean that we all end up being equal or that we all are considered to be equal, to need the same things, because we are all different. We should embrace diversity, and we all need different things, like in the example that Eve-Marie made. So equality to me means inclusion in the AI ecosystem. Who are the stakeholders? How should I talk to them? How should I consult with them? How should I design with them the AI that I want to build? And then inclusion also in the way I build the AI model itself. And then also inclusion, once the AI model is deployed, in the impact that I have in the communities that will be impacted by this AI system and the service that it will provide in that community and so on. So is that inclusive enough? So inclusion in various aspects, the ecosystem, the AI life cycle, as well as the deployment scenario.
So I really like the perspectives offered by you all, right? If you heard the question, the opening lead question was, what does AI through the lens of equality look like? Now, I'm being very specific about the words. Valerie, you spoke about perspective, impact. Eva Marie, you talked about what it is you're looking at, specifics in the naming conventions, equality, equity. And then you finished off with process. So there are specific perspectives, right? But remember the panel in the morning where the leading thought leaders were talking about language models and what language is specific in its very nature, and that's words. Words have sentiment. So this panel's called AI through the lens of equality, transparency, and diversity. What do these keywords actually mean to people? Eva Marie, we'll start with you because we had a robust discussion in the green room. And you started out saying equality should actually be equity. What do these words mean? Equality, transparency, and diversity. And are they just interchangeably used?
So for me, when we were starting off building AI models, in 2014, we were building what is very on fashion now again, is connected ecosystems. It was the world before GDPR, it was the Wild West, it was heaven, and we had all of the telephone information that we connected with healthcare information, we connected it with OpenStreetMaps and all of that together. And so we could really tell you who is at which corner of the street at which time of the day. And we used that for banking the underbank, for store forecasting, for actually knowing what to stock in your supermarket, for pretty much everything. And we always thought, oh, we're absolutely fine because we don't have race, we don't have religion, and we don't have gender as inputs data. But when then comes to the input data, you're actually starting to have proxies for the values. So even if you say we're looking at equality now, or we're looking at equity now, you might not see that in the outcome of the model. We often say that models need to be transparent and explainable. But how do we link that to the models? Is a model built for certain demographics? Then you cannot transfer it to another demographics. Do you actually have the data set that represents that demographic? So we see so many issues in that of how do we build it in equal, how do we build it in equity? What do we want to achieve? It's very complicated from the technical side in the end.
Explainability, and this is something we spoke about earlier. Francesca, you were talking about the explainability around when you're applying or building the AI models. Are you actually understanding these three words that we've talked about, transparency, diversity, and equality? Is that well understood in building AI models?
Yes, sometimes I think that I would separate the transparency and explainability. In my view, explainability needs to be a property of the AI model and some capability that the AI model has to, for example, if you talk about local explainability, for example, to explain why it produces a certain output out of the input data. Why is recommending a human being to do something instead of something else, given the input data about the current problem to be solved. So that's explainability. So that requires technical solutions to understand how to embed some of the most successful techniques that we use in AI, like those based on machine learning and deep learning, which are a bit opaque in terms of explainability. So they need really to be a lot of advancement technically to make them more explainable. Transparency instead, in my view, is mostly a process that needs to be followed by the developers and the design team to be transparent about what has been done in building that AI model.
Yeah.
And so that the AI model that is deployed together with some other document. At IBM, we call it a fact sheet, but you can call it any way you want, some other document that describes what has been done, which test has been done, whether it has been tested for bias or not, and with which notion of fairness, and this and that. So all the information that can be used to make an informed decision by whoever is going to use this AI model in order to use it only when and where it's appropriate and how it is appropriate to use it.
You talked about transparency in an internal environment, transparency around the actual build and outcome of that solution. I was talking to a speaker early on in the speaker room who said to me, yeah, transparency could mean, do I need to share my banking details now, or what do I need to share? Is there a form of surveillance that will ask me to say something, to share confidential details of mergers and acquisitions? The idea of transparency. So I encourage you to think about those words and maybe talk to us afterwards and tell us what you think of transparency, diversity, and equality. Valerie, at Intelligent Story, what do those words mean?
You know, at Intelligent Story, I always try to look at things under many angles. And the word transparency means a lot of things for different people. If I look at what the word transparency could mean for a user, for instance, it's really about disclosure. I think that companies and designers have a responsibility to disclose when they are using an algorithm that is going to make a decision that is going to impact the user's life. If I am going to be assessed for a job, for instance, by an algorithm, then I should be aware of this because it's really about being honest with the user and giving also the user the possibility for a recourse. Say I suspect that I have been treated unfairly by this machine, then I should be able to ask for the company or the system to be accountable and answer my questions and demonstrate that I was not the subject of disparate impacts. I was not discriminated for my gender, my age, or whatever criteria we can think of. So that's really from a user perspective. And just one thing, we're going to live in a world where we are going to be more and more surrounded by artificial entities. There can be voice robots, but they can be also synth that we will interact with on the internet. And we want to make sure that we can be given the opportunity to know that these entities are artificial and that they're not real, because the frontier is becoming thinner and thinner. And now a quick word on the policy side. Transparency is also a very critical factor, because if we want to make sure that companies are accountable and that their systems are fair, we want to make sure also that the public sector is able, for instance, to audit those systems and to make companies accountable for how they develop those systems. So that can be what Francesca mentioned, fact sheet, that can be model cards. There are many technical ways of achieving that.
Many technical ways of achieving that, also through what would be guidelines. You know, you have a number of words used for how you would typically start out thinking about building an AI model, developing that team, testing it with the intended audience, and then allowing it to learn so that it continually improves its outcome. The words that are used for that typically are playbooks, guidebooks, fact sheets, handbooks. These talk to wanting to remove the bias. But let's ask the question, how would bias be first built into an AI solution? Do you want to start, Eva Marie, with the work you're doing at Ernst Young?
Yeah, okay. So when you look at trusted AI, it really starts right from the beginning. And it starts with, what is the question that I want to answer? And then, do I actually have the right data? So what impact am I generating? And how can I generate that with the data? So you really have to look at your data, analyze it, and make sure it is not biased. When you come to large-scale models, and you use dimension reductions and so on, you might sometimes not know.
So when you say dimension reductions, just for the benefit of the audience, let's give the example that you used earlier on. Say you had a table.
Yes, so in our when you build connected ecosystems, you end up having different information. For example, smart meter readings. For example, transport information, phone information, and so on. So it's not.
Those would be data points, right?
Yes. So you end up with having a vast amount of data. In order to process that, you start using different techniques to reduce the size of the data, the amount of features. So that could be, for example, in a simple box where you say, instead of length, height, and width, I just use volume.
Volume. And that you don't know what is length, what is height, what is width.
Yes. So if somebody asks, so what drives my decision? You might not know that it's actually just the length. And similar techniques you can use in other factors. So when you have proxy data, for example, one of the examples when you do retail forecasting, you see shopping behavior. And if somebody doesn't buy in a UK supermarket that is very heavily, by a certain demographic used, and somebody doesn't buy pork, you know that he's high probability of him or her being Muslim. If that feature, that buying pork or not buying pork, moves into your data set, you actually end up having a proxy for religion. Mm-hmm. So you might end up having a heavily biased model, without actually seeing it. And that's why the transparency is so important, the description at the beginning. It also helps the data scientist to think about what am I actually doing? As a data scientist, you develop the fact book or whatever while you're building the model. And you can always go like, what did I do actually at the beginning? Oh, that's what I did. That's what I meant. And so it helps you to understand how does bias goes into your model. So when you look at the outcomes and you test for bias, and we have the technology side of testing it, you also need to look at the data at the beginning and the technology.
That's right.
And thinking about the meaning of it.
Asking the right questions, and that's my philosophy. Asking the right questions will get you the right, get you a better answer, actually. On that note, Francesca, you're asking particular questions about how bias is first built at IBM. What are some of the questions you would ask?
Well, more than the question, I mean, to be able to ask the right questions from all the people that are involved in building an AI solution. The first lesson that we learned at IBM in, for example, building the playbook for our developers and designers of AI is that technical tools to detect and mitigate bias, for example, and then the other dimensions of trustworthy AI, but let's focus on the bias thing, are of course fundamental. You know, they are the center, that's what developers will use. But they are not enough. They are actually the kind of easy part, because the most important part is to educate them, to have design thinking sessions to help them really understand what is this bias, why should I care, why should I worry about the risk of injecting bias, why is this important for the solution that they're building and for the community that this solution is going to impact.
So it's also to test their thinking, you know.
So guidelines, design thinking sessions, educational modules, and also, and very important, diversity in teams. Because most of these biases that developers may inject into an AI system in the data or in the model itself are because people have, like all of us, a lot of unconscious biases. So if you put in a team all people that have the same unconscious biases, then they can't even recognize that there are these biases. So you need diversity is already one very important ingredient to achieve what you want to achieve.
Diversity is an important ingredient, and you mentioned earlier when we were speaking, I remember, talking that actually bias is not just in a traditional AI build. So if you're using specific code to write. You know, you said it's not the traditional sitting down, writing a piece of snippet of code and there's a bias inserted in there. It's actually the process of identifying different models or different data sets to train what you're considering. You talked about that just now, Eva Marie, with taking into account volume rather than the elements that make up volume. So there's a lot of things to think about. So if you're building or putting together teams that are building AI solutions, then these are some of the things you want to think about. Now, Valerie, how would you talk about that? And Eva Marie, I see you waving at me. I will come to you. I want to wrap up with Valerie on this question, which is, how would bias be first built into a solution from your perspective?
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting question because when we talk about technology, we tend to think that every technical problem calls for a technical solution, right? And for bias, it's really a human problem. And very often, if not, unfortunately, most of the time, the teams who are developing algorithms just don't look like their users, don't look like the end user that is going to be the most impacted by those algorithms. So that's why it's so important indeed to build diverse teams, not just in terms of competencies, although it's extremely important. We want teams that also include people coming from the humanities, people who represent fields in social science, for instance, but also people who have different life experiences. People who are able to speak for the communities also that are going to be potentially harmed or are facing a risk of being harmed by this or that algorithm. So involving those stakeholders in the design of algorithms is extremely important.
Yeah.
And I would say that my recommendation always, or the plan I follow, or that I recommend to really work on solving solving the problem of unfair AI is the following. First, it's extremely important to create awareness in executives and leaders. So educating them not only on what AI can do and cannot do, but educating them also on what are the risks that they're facing today and the unforeseen risk that they may face tomorrow in the light of regulations that are also really enforcing more and more scrutiny on the fairness of algorithms, and thankfully so. The second thing is that I will recommend is to really make sure also that we really develop a plan so that the workforce can be trained. And when I say the workforce, I don't mean just people who are building algorithms, but people who are not at all technical employees within the company, but who will interact with those. And we know that 88% of companies who generate ROI from AI are companies who actually invested a lot in training both the non-technical and the technical workforce.
I'm hearing the word education here. Education and communication. Those two components are never ending. In fact, I mean, that's the lifeblood of all the work that we are doing at the end of it, despite our outcomes. You're echoing a lot of Francesca's sentiment around diversity. So what's our topic? AI through the lens of equality, transparency, and diversity. Diversity was mentioned quite a lot in this discussion, particular discussion point. Eva Marie, you had your hand up, so over to you. What's up?
I only wanted to say one thing when we talked about the fact sheets. Models are built for specific reasons. And that we have to be aware, because a lot of data scientists copy and paste from Kaggle, from GitHub, and so on, without having any idea what the model was built for. So even if two people just build a quick model and it's fine enough because it was just meant for a little game or something, you often don't know where the model ends up to. And it might end up in a high-risk solution without being tested, without anyone really understanding what it does, and that it was actually not meant for this. And so the risk pattern might change, and you really have to be aware of that.
And this is where AI governance plays an important role. Not just from, when we say AI governance, people tend to think, oh, public sector, government and regulatory bodies. But here I'm thinking AI governance within the organization. And sometimes, of course, if it's just a small startup, they don't have the means to develop a big AI governance body with multi-stakeholders, but at least they can develop policies for the product that they're building, and built into those policies ethical charts, and that will really support the development of a product that will apply AI ethics and not just talk about principles without really translating them.
When you talk about AI ethics, the first thing is what? AI ethics, how? How are these two things linked? So ethics in itself, and we're talking words, right? And again, I'm going to say this because that panel in the morning really struck me in terms of what language means to people. If you think about Arabic, Urdu, German, French, any language for that matter, there are specific ways, the dialect, the method of speaking, the different ways of saying something, multiple ways of saying something. Imagine the amount of data that you have now to inject into training sets that need to go into models that have to output. There's so much of stuff going on. So how do we make sense of it? That's why we're trying to interrogate these words. Again, we're going to say it: equality, transparency, and diversity. Now, we want to have some closing remarks because you've been wonderfully fantastic in explaining these concepts to us. Francesca, I'll start with you. How will technology enable this learning process, right, for human beings to deal with their own bias, inherent and learned?
Yeah, so to answer that question, I think that first we have to have it clear in our mind that technology should support human progress and not the other way around or something confused there. So technological progress is there to support and advance human progress in the sense of being more aware, being more developed as human beings, as societies, and protecting and advancing more the values that we think are important for us. So once that is clear, but then it means a lot of things. It's not just a sentence. It means a lot of things in concrete, right? In developing AI and deploying it in the scenarios and in use cases that are aligned to this clear statement. Then, of course, one can understand that the technology itself, whether built in the right way and used in the right way, can actually be useful to advance humanity in the direction that we want, in the vision of the future that we want. For example, as we discussed together in the back room, we shouldn't use technology to bring people to use mostly a reactive way, to react to technology without thinking, or to follow in a lazy way where technology will bring us.
Yeah.
But we should use technology actually to be more aware of our values and of how we want technology to play a role in protecting and advancing those values. So to help us to mention, one of the widely used, cognitive theories of thinking fast and slow, to advance more our thinking slow, our reflecting upon us and upon the role of technology, rather than just pushing us to think fast, to react in an unconscious way. Because it's exactly this reacting in this unconscious way where the bias is.
That's
in
it.
an unconscious bias. So to avoid and to make sure that we use less our bias, but we reflect more when it is needed, then we need technology to bring that. And technology can have that role, but we need to be intentional in building it in that way.
And you know what? You made such a brilliant point, because you've highlighted the concept around how does AI affect humanity. Well, it's actually encouraging us to have an awareness and an intention. Awareness and intention. I mean, these two things are across all value systems, shared value systems across the world, is something that assists you with good personal development anyway as a human being. Awareness and intention. You always have an intention to do something. So awareness and intention means we can interrogate what we do, how we do it, and how we say it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? Valerie, at Intelligent Story, how would technology help shape those shared value systems?
I think AI is a mirror. It's mirroring us, it's mirroring our own bias, and we should really pay a lot of attention to what we see in that mirror, and to who we don't see also in that mirror.
Who we don't see. I like
Yes,
that.
I think it's very important. And there's a very simple way to do so. If any of you use an AI image generator and just enter a simple text prompt, you want the generator to generate the image of a surgeon. Well, most of the time the image will be that of a white man. If you do the same for a pilot or a professor, there will again be a white man. We have to change this. I think that this makes us realize that there's a lot of bias in the data, and that bias is there because society also perpetuated those issues for a very long time. So I think that today we have the opportunity to think differently, to realize that what was there in society that was actually impeding human progress, impeding equality and equity. Well, we have an option here to really reveal those biases thanks to AI, and that's why I think that AI is going to play a very important role in make us understand where to put our values and where to invest our efforts in. And I agree with what Francesca said. We need to design value-sensitive algorithms versus giving too much power to technology determinism. I think it's a very intentional choice we need to make today.
Intentional choice, values systems, or values-based algorithms.
Yes.
Values-based algorithms, because that then is the output that I remember Eva Marie was talking to us about before coming in here, is if you're asking technology to help you to do this, tell us your thoughts. continue on that strain of thought?
So I'm actually extremely hopeful at the moment because we know that currently we have the data to show how biased our world is. The most important topic the whole last days is ethics. We would have not had an ethics conference 20 years ago. But because we see our data now, we can see how biased our world is. We can see what the impact it has on our AI models. We realize we're at a tipping point.
Yes.
And that's why we put ethics at the top of the agenda. It's also not bad intention to build bad AI. Building AI is completely cheap. Everybody can do that. Every 16-year-old kid
It's just an outcome.
just builds something. Building good AI, building ethical AI is the completely different ballgame. That's where it becomes expensive. That's where you have to have everything in place from the right mindset, the right leadership, the right experience. You need to have senior people who've been in the trenches and seen what can possibly go wrong. And that's where we now have the opportunity of really changing the world and saying, what is the world we want to live in? And how can we use the technology that we have to make sure it's better than where we come from?
Better than where we come from. I hope that's what you've taken away from this panel on equality, AI through the lens of equality, transparency, and diversity. What did we take away from this panel? Ask the right questions, interrogate, have open conversations. My great thanks to Francesca, Eva Marie, and Valerie. Please give them a round of applause.
You can go over.